The Guardian legend. Long ago, in a distant galaxy, an alien race sent a huge world, Naju, hurtling towards Earth, loaded with a cargo of mysterious life forms. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
Joe, the back of the box starts with long ago in a distant galaxy. That's kind of Star Wars, right? Like,
doesn't ring any bells. Doesn't ring any bells at all. But yeah, I mean, I guess they're just they're going with the tropes. It's a good way to get your space opera fans.
The one example of space opera with galaxies long ago.
Not anymore.
And also, the Guardian legend, right? I don't think immediately of, like, a shmup, that's for sure. I definitely don't think I'm about to play a shmup, but I also wouldn't expect an adventure game. The Guardian legend, to me, sounds like an RPG. Sean, what kind of game did you think we were going to play?
Yeah, I didn't have any real prediction for what the genre was going to be, but setting, I was way off. When I heard Guardian Legend, I thought this was going to be sort of like a sword and sorcery sort of thing, and not so much a sci-fi thing.
I was going to say, it does sort of like give me the vibe of like, that's why I said space opera. I mean, partially because of Star Wars, but also like gives me that vibe of like a sword and sorcery thing that was set in a futuristic setting. So I get it. Maybe it's just the title that does that for me.
The title just confuses me, like, just syntaxically, if that's a word. I think we were talking about this in the sort of, rump of the last episode. I don't really get what a better... I think like the Legend of the Guardian would make more sense, but that's just me.
Legend of the Guardian sounds good, but I would argue that the Guardian legend is just fine because, that would be like... That's more of like the title, The Guardian legend is what people refer to that legend as. Any biters?
I was say I think it's kind of it's like it adds to a little bit of a mystery to it. It's not quite in the way that like the layman vernacular would say it.
Am I a layman to you?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, we've talked a lot about the title, and we've talked a lot about what this game could or maybe sounds like it is based on just the title alone, but it was kind of surprising to find out that this is an action-adventure shmup game where you control a humanoid robot who can also transform into a spaceship and is obviously known as the Guardian, that's her name, and in a quest to destroy a large alien-infested world, which I think we refer to in the back of the box as Naju, which could be Naboo. Again, just more Star Wars stuff. However, since this game is 89 and Naboo was 2001 or something, I think, George Lucas probably watched a lot of the Guardian Legend as he was preparing for his prequel films.
I think I saw that in one of
he watched it,
the behind the scenes, yeah.
Yeah, he watched it. He didn't play it. His big brother was playing it, and he had to watch.
Right, exactly. Everybody remembers Steve Lucas.
50-year-olds. Yeah.
So, action shmup, adventure shmup, action-adventure shmup, whatever you want to call it. Have we seen something like this before on the NES where, like, two genres get merged into one game?
Yeah. The closest thing we saw was like Blaster Master. It was kind of like this, right? Where you get in your vehicle, you get your vehicle combat. I guess it's not really necessarily like a different. It doesn't change from like a scrolling shmup into like something else, but it definitely it changed the context of
definitely
each, like, battle.
Different modes of play.
I
think this is one of the most like there's a bigger disparity between the genres that we've seen in prior implementations of this. I don't think we've had a shmup with. Maybe we have. I feel like we had to have, right?
What?
A shmup with another kind of game tacked on?
No, I feel like every shmup we've played so far on the system has been a shmup with maybe
shmup.
some sort of like, experience system attached to it.
Yeah.
I think we've had a couple of games that I wouldn't primarily consider shmups that suddenly had like shmup element, like the reverse. Like what was I think like Golgo 13 had like the helicopter shmup, which is like a little mini game that you do every couple of levels. And I think there was like one other like that where it's like, oh, now you're on the shmup part and now you're back in your regular part. Like the shmup was like an aside. Yeah. Whereas this, it almost feels like 50-50.
Yeah, we've definitely played games that have like genre combinations, but they're a lot more like half-baked, I'd say.
Yeah.
And so the shmup side is very familiar to developer of this game, Compile, because they're known for making some of the best shmups of all time. And so I think, there's the shmup part of this game, and we'll break these all down later, but there's the shmup part of this game that is very much like how we've been playing these and how we experience them. But the action-adventure side chose more of a Legend of Zelda and Metroid style approach, where it is that, top-down dungeon interface from Legend of Zelda. But I also say Metroid because you can choose to skip objects, to wait for later to collect certain things. You can go back, you can skip certain areas. So it was interesting to see a game where it's 50-50 between the shmup and the Zelda part, but the Zelda part is definitely the more consequential part of it, because that really depends on what you do in terms of power-ups and upgrades and exploration, and the shmup side is more like the minigame explanation of how you travel between the different areas on the planet.
Yeah, I'd say the time you spend in this Zelda-like sort of setting is much higher than the amount of time you're playing the shmup.
Yeah, but I'll say that, for a group of... Well, I can't speak for you guys, obviously, but none of us really love shmups, am I right, normally?
I'm a pretty big fan.
Okay, maybe I'm projecting. Okay, so we got like the Goldilocks thing. I hate shmups, but I was actually found myself like looking forward to the shmup sections, and I think that they found like a perfect balance for it. Like it felt like I was collecting shmup levels. Like it felt like I was like that's my goal. Like I got to get to the next shmup part, but getting there was really fun and finding it. And then I found it, and I'm like, oh, here we go, another shmup, which is like not what I've ever wanted
shmup,
before.
Which is the perfect size shmup.
Yeah, exactly. It's like another little thing. Like, oh, if I get this, it just gives you a really good sense of progress. So I think that this is for me like the perfect amount of shmup. Is shmup sounding weird to anyone else?
We're saying it enough times now, but I would say, Joe, I agree with you, but also like it's really cool how all of this, whether, depending on which genre of the game you're playing or which part of the game you're in, it's all explained very coherently in the story, the idea that like, you start in the shmup form and you're kind of entering the planet and you're hitting area 0. That's smart and everything like that, but that's just like, okay, that's expected. Like, that's just the start of the game or whatever. But then to have, like, the lore explained to you while you're playing, and then, like, the exploration aspect, like, things slowly get revealed to you. But then also, where the shmup part comes in again to get you from area 0 to 1 to 2 is a really neat way of, like, telling that in the story of how you're getting between the areas. And I don't think we've really seen too many games that care about mixing story and gameplay. I think not to its fault, but like Ninja Gaiden was one of those things where like story was only ever delivered in cutscenes after you finish levels. And that's fine, but it's cool to see it done while you're playing the game.
Yeah, and that said, I mean, most of the story is still like text on a screen, which is still sort of impressive to me because like I'd say 90% of the games on this platform leave the story to exist within the contents of the manual. So I'm still happy about that. But I do also agree that I really appreciated this game's use of like sort of contextual or like interactive storytelling, where the actual things that you're doing within the game make sense to the game world, which is like another line that hasn't really been crossed too much in the games that we've played.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's like instead of you having to instead of it feeling like every once in a while the game tells you a little more of the story, it's like you're organically uncovering you're discovering it for yourself as you go. It feels more like you're actually on this adventure rather than like your hand being held.
Yeah. Environmental storytelling. That's sort of what I meant. Yeah.
For sure. And I think, the difference is, of course, is just most video games, especially back then, were just broken up in like level formats, right? Like I think Metroid and probably Zelda 2 were the only ones where it was like continuous gameplay from beginning to end, where like you were just exploring the world and constantly unlocking new things. And this fits kind of nice with those games, and we're going to bring them up a lot because there's just a lot of parallels to them. I just found it surprising that I've never heard of the Guardian Legend before. Like, I'm not trying to hype the game up or anything, but when you say Legend of Zelda and Metroid and then talk about other games in that category, the fact that we're talking about the Guardian Legend, it's kind of surprising, right?
Yeah.
The fact that I still didn't know what sort of world this game took place in sort of speaks to that. It's still such an early game that you'd think that it would still be talked about, even if they thought it was bad, like as like an early attempt of future exploratory games.
So let's talk about that top-down exploration mode when you're in the humanoid form first, because that is the bulk of the game. We describe this as Zelda-like, when you're in the dungeons, you have your grid and you move between squares to uncover new parts of the area. It's all non-linear though, and it's represented, your space in the layout of the labyrinth is like in X and Y. So you're in like X8, Y9, and you move accordingly to find new stuff. What did we think of just like the exploration as a whole as you're going through this? Should it have been more guided? Was it fun to explore? Was it helpful that there was a map of some sorts, like a mini map? Did that help? Joe, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate this kind of gameplay if it's done right, where there's a lot of like you uncover things that you can't access yet, and you have to figure out how, and then come back to it. And it. Now, admittedly, I didn't beat this game. I actually, after watching some videos afterwards, like realized this is a really long game. So I definitely have a lot more to go. But like I was getting to a point where I was starting to know my way around different sections of the planet, and I think that was because it organically makes me remember, like, oh, okay, there's this, what do you call them, like a doorway or a gateway or whatever here that I don't have unlocked. Later on, I unlock moon doors, and then I'm like, oh, there was a moon door back there, and you figure that out. And I think that was like a good way to get you to like enjoy the exploration, because you're going through, you're fighting all these enemies on the screens and stuff, and it would be easy for it to all just kind of blur together, but it gives you reason to contextualize where you are in the world.
I like I like what they did with this. I think the one thing that I had a problem with was how if it's going to be a game this big, and if it's going to be a labyrinth, I need a little bit more set dressing, I think. Because a game this big, a game this long, the majority of your game time is going to be sort of on like in these same hallways with the same like sort of color scheme. I don't know if it bothered just you guys as much as it bothered me. And I do know that there are other like sort of tile sets later in the game when you get into different areas, but I did think that the environments felt a little samey.
For sure. The environments definitely have that problem, where if you didn't have the X and Y markings on the map, I would be very lost at times, because I'd be unsure if like I was just heading around in a circle or what have you. But also, like, there's another problem with everything looking the samey, in the sense of if you have to explore if you're the kind of gamer that I am, and you have to explore everything anyway just to make sure you don't miss any particular things. I mean, it's not like there's secrets to uncover. It's just that, like, make sure you visit every place to find all the different power-ups that you could find before you move on to the next area. When you play like that, it doesn't really help to make it, have a lot of backtracking and have a lot of, like, oh, I'm not quite sure if I've been here before. Like, it would have been helpful if the mini-map maybe had, like, a way that you could eventually unlock, like, where the power-ups are, or if you collected that power-up, so like, okay, I shouldn't head back that way. It's definitely, I'm not asking for it to hold my hand or anything like that. I wouldn't want it to tell me which order and where to go for things. But, for me, the exploration was missed a little, because instead I was just kind of making sure that I hit every single XY coordinate.
Yeah, and when there isn't, like, anything special about any one tile aside from, like, this is where this key is, or this is where this pickup is, it's not as fun to navigate. Like, if there was some, like, cool, like, if this tile was the one with the, the, like, ruined building in it, or if there were just more, unique landmarks, I think I could have gotten behind it a bit more.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying now too, and I think that, like, even with the obstacles, there are always those, like, tile cover things. Like, where in Zelda you have, like, a tree and you have a rock and things like that, or there's just, like, nothing like that there. Although I will say, to the idea of making it a little more clear where the power-ups are, I'm not sure, but I imagine that the intent wasn't for people to play the way that a lot of people like us play now today, where it's like, we got to get everything, got to unlock everything. Because I do sort of like the idea that it's like, if we're not playing like that and we're just playing and seeing what we end up with and, like, going where we need to go and whatever power-ups we find along the way we get, it's kind of cool that, like, I can compare my character to your character and we can have, like, totally different power sets. And I think that's kind of, like, neat. It makes it a little more, like, personalized to, like, your journey.
Now, the only problem there, Joe, is that the shmup stages, which we aren't going to talk about right now, they're pretty darn hard, especially later on, and you can use the power-ups that you collect in the humanoid form as your shmup form, so I would argue that you want a lot of those power-ups to help you during the shmup stages. So you kind of do want to make sure you collect a lot of that stuff, because if you're like me and didn't collect some of those things, you're going to have a really hard time getting through the shmup stages.
Oh, do you necessarily think that you need all of them? Like, I feel like for the shmup stages I did, I usually would find one that works really well for that stage.
Yeah, you're right.
But,
you
like, I wouldn't switch between them too much. So, like, and then maybe that would also give me a reason to be like, all right, well, I'm not ready for this yet. I got to go find some stuff, like, explore. But yeah, then it wouldn't hurt to, I guess, have, like, a map to some of it or something like that. But
that what you mentioned with the weapons working in both gameplay elements is what I think this game really made this something new. Was not only do you have this really cool animation of your space girl turning into a freaking fighter jet, but then all of those weapons that you're using on the overworld also have an equivalent in the shmup game space. I thought that was just really neat and really polishy. You know what I mean? For sure.
Yeah. I thought it was a really nice touch too. We didn't talk about the combat when you're the humanoid form, which thankfully is not a melee weapon like Link's sword. It's actually a gun that you shoot off, and for some reason I couldn't tell or not, but, like, looks like it has really good rapid fire even from the start. Like, I think it gets more rapid, but it shoots pretty constantly if you hold it down, and I appreciated that. But also just the idea that, like, when you're dealing with enemies on screen, it's a little different than how you dealt with them in Zelda, because now you take on everything from a distance. You don't really want to be close to these spawning enemies. And so, we were talking about, like, okay, I've been here before, and it's a chore to find that out and then get out of it, but it's really not, because backtracking and getting from tile to tile is actually pretty easy in this game because you can run through tiles before everything spawns, or you can shoot at things and take care of them from a distance. I appreciated the combat in this Zelda-like clone aspect of it because of the projectile versus melee weapon.
Yeah, and I think like they made it so that you could skip any fight, you could skip any encounter, but the economy of the game only works if you do fight some of these, and sometimes they will just straight up get in your way. So I think that they had a good balance of how much combat you could or could not actually enter. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, am I crazy here? Or do you level up based on your score?
Maybe.
I leveled up and my health went up a few times randomly, and I assumed it was always like, well, I was killing things, so I just assumed it's like, oh, the more things you kill, the more you level up. So like that incentivized me again to attack and not just run through everything, you know. But it also never felt like I needed to go grind. Maybe it will later in the game, but so far it hasn't felt like that.
Yeah, it never felt like a grind, that's for sure. And also because there's these power chips that you have to collect as well that, basically that's the power chips power up your power-ups, if that makes sense. But you have like 50 of these to start, and then once you run out, you can't use your, we'll call them sub-weapons, so we keep saying power chips, power-ups. These sub-weapons can't be used once you don't have any more power chips, but you also use your power chips to buy upgrades in the shops that you find in these areas, which is a little weird that this like alien planet that is hurtling towards the Earth also has shops on it that you can buy sub-weapons to take down the said planet. But whatever. So, when you do that with the power chips, it's cool that they're a currency and they also are used to fire your sub-weapons. But I couldn't help feel like it was a little easy to manage the spend versus fire, because the normal combat weapon that you have is pretty darn good against most of the top-down combat parts of the game. Even the sub-bosses that you find when they like lock you into that current tile, like an alarm goes off and then all of a sudden you're locked in and you have to fight the sub-boss. Even that sub-boss can be taken down with just your usual weapon, so you don't have to use sub-weapons that often, and when you do, it either doesn't cost a lot of power chips, or you can probably find power chips in a nearby tile pretty easily. I never felt like I was running out of this cash.
Yeah, well, I actually felt like I used the sub-weapons quite a bit, like probably most of the time. I was like using both, hitting both A and B at the same time. Not
you
because
just like
I
using
felt
the
like
lightsaber.
My blast. What's that?
You just like using that lightsaber.
The two-sided one?
I think, well, first it's just like a beam sword, right? Like it's just...
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
I don't even think I had
a
that
few
one.
times.
I had like a double-sided beam sword.
I think that's the upgrade, yeah.
Oh, okay. I must have not even used it while it was normal and upgraded it or something. The reason that I was using these sub-weapons a lot was not necessarily because I thought my blaster wasn't good enough, but because it helped me to not die a lot. It helped me kill things quick enough that they wouldn't hit me first. So, like, it was fun to kind of see, like, oh, okay, there's a crowd of people. I'm going to use there's, like, the one that circles around you, and that'll take out, it's, like, good for crowd control. And then there's other that are just more powerful versions of your blaster, and there's one that'll just go in a straight line and kill everything on that path. And, like, there's a lot of reasons to switch up. So, like, I ended up using them, actually, most of the time.
Yeah, I did appreciate that they actually seem to have, like, a utility. They're not just like for fun. Like, there's been a lot of games that they have power-ups, but they're like, there's either like one that's obviously the most efficient and there's no reason to use the others, or so yeah, I like that these sort of had different use cases. I think the one that I found to be the most useful in like the overworld bosses or at least the few that I actually played, was one that was sort of like it send out waves behind you at 45-degree angles. Like the icon is like a Y. So that made it much easier for you to actually like move more evasively while still landing some blows on the boss. So I think that was a good example of like these weapons aren't just bigger blaster.
Yeah, way more thought put into them than I think we're used to so far, for the most part.
And there's 12 of them, which is a large amount, but then, as Sean mentioned, they upgrade. So there's actually, I think, technically 36 then by that, because I think that you can each upgrade 3 times, or something like that. Don't quote me on exactly 36, but like that's a ton of variations in, forget about just like a Zelda-like game, but in a shmup. Usually in a shmup, I think the most we ever saw was like 12, and we were like kind of amazed by that, right? Like, I forget which game had that. Maybe it was like Xanac or something, but that's pretty cool that like there's so many combinations here. And as Joe mentioned, you can compare builds with other people because, he was talking about how he went right to the double-bladed sword, but, some people like, need certain kind of weapons earlier, but you don't need any of the weapons to actually like progress, right? Like you could theoretically just collect the necessary amount of power chips for the upgrades to get the keys that would let you go to the next. The shmup levels are described as corridors, and the Zelda-like stages are described as areas. So you could just keep going between area and corridor, just doing the necessary stuff without using any of it.
Yeah, it all comes down to like personal playstyle.
And your regular gun actually also upgrades too. And I think when you start to use a sub weapon, it actually downgrades. So that's also sort of adding to the balance. But yeah, even your regular pea shooter can turn into a giant like wave gun sort of thing.
Yeah, the whole thing gives me like, it's gonna sound funny, but it gives me like real Ratchet and Clank vibes. It's just like find the next cool weapon, upgrade it, and you get your whole arsenal, figured out. You're exploring this world. There's flying levels. I mean, I don't know why. It's just giving me Ratchet and Clank vibes.
And Ratchet and Clank is one of your best ofs, right?
I'm a big Ratchet and Clank guy. Yes.
The Ratchet and Clank caucus.
In the Zelda games, you get those old men who give you. Sorry, Zelda 1. In Zelda 2, there's some wise people though in the town that give you clues as well. But those old men would give you.
Dirty old men give you.
Yeah, they would give you the clues, and those would be like hints that were very vague, or were just very straightforward. In this game, you get hints in a similar way where the either the shopkeepers or places that you find have these story beats, or they have how to get to the next corridor. What were we thinking about these? Were they straightforward enough, or did it require some actual I wonder what they meant by that?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, there were some times where I was like, oh, that's perfectly straightforward. I think somewhere towards the beginning, there's something that says, like, you'll need a special weapon to get through the barrier or something like that, to get through the wall. And I was playing for a little bit, and I got to the next area, and there was a dead end. And then I kept playing, and I got back to that first thing, and I was like, oh, I'm supposed to use the grenades to get through that. Went all the way back through, used the grenades, and just didn't do anything. And I was like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't as obvious as I thought. But it was a little bit of a head-scratcher. I was like, okay, what is this asking me to do? But it was nice to... I think it was like a good balance.
What did you end up having to do?
I don't know what that was telling me to do, actually. I moved on, and I didn't end up figuring out what barrier they were talking about, so I haven't done it yet.
All right.
But at least the game wasn't talking to you in like riddles, right? Like it wasn't anything so cryptic or a terrible translation that you couldn't figure out what to do next. But we also have the luxury of guides, and I totally went on Strategy Wiki for portions of this just to see where certain power-ups were located and stuff, and there's no shame in that.
Yeah. And the game itself used it had a good use of the characters it was allowed, where it was able to still make complete sentences, which I think is a big problem we have with other things. It's like, oh, there's only 5 characters. We can only use, we can only make 3 words here. They'll get it. They'll know what we're talking about, and nobody has any clue what it's trying to say. So this one was refreshing.
It's much better than Simon's Quest in that regard.
Right.
Yes.
And the overall objective of these humanoid stages is that you have to make sure that you deactivate these 10 safety devices, activate. You don't want to deactivate them. You want to activate the 10 safety devices that are in each of the areas, and doing that will stop the planet on its course to Earth.
Well, it's a self-destruct. You gotta blow up the
I think
planet.
you are deactivating the safety devices so you can self-destruct the planet.
It's actually very unsafe.
Yeah.
But doesn't the game word it like you have to activate safety devices? So do they mean that they're safety devices for the player?
I guess safety is a relative term, Like,
Yeah. I thought it was like the evil planet, which I don't think we've described yet. That like you're on a planet that is traveling towards Earth. Like an evil planet is traveling towards Earth to destroy Earth. And
it wasn't always evil, but over time it just got more
evil. It's become evil, yes. And that planet has safety devices to prevent it from self-destructing, and you need to deactivate it so you could self-destruct it. I believe. Could be wrong.
Okay, that makes more sense to me. If you're going to get into the plot, though, we might as well talk about that shocking reveal when you first become humanoid, and it has the person who previously tried to do all this, and it was like, I failed, but here's what you have to do. Like if you're reading this, I'm dead, but here's what you need to do. And I like to think that is like previous versions of the Guardian that tried to pull this off. Like when you get game overs, that's like, you go back and that's you.
You're just a clone.
Yeah, exactly. Like now, like the next, similar to like, Nier Automata, where like, the next version of 2B. Spoiler. Yeah, no, I don't think that's a huge spoiler.
I'm spoiled.
But overall, the plot, as wacky as that sounds, I was into it. Giant planet hurtling towards another planet. That sounds intense.
Yeah, I liked the format of like the lost log. The whole I'm dead, but you can do this. I dug that in terms of like a form of storytelling.
Yeah, me too.
But let's get back to those self-detonation devices for a second, because that's, if that's your objective, right, and that's what you want to make sure you do, to do that and just to explore in general, one part that we haven't really talked about is that other than enemies and tiles, inside of each of those, like tile areas that you go to, there are these like gray blocks that you have to shoot at, and a lot of them are just nothing at all. But occasionally, like, you'll shoot at one and it'll either reveal a power-up or reveal a hole to another part of the area or reveal something else, like it's just, it's planted by the game. Like, it's designed to be in those specific spots. It's not random or anything. Even the power chips, they're perfectly placed where they need to be. But I couldn't help but feel like a lot of that was like the most repetitive part of the game. I didn't care about like fighting enemies over and over again or anything like that. I cared more about like the fact that I just have to go into these rooms and shoot these gray blocks that most of them don't even really mean anything, and it just felt like I was just clearing off a stage. It didn't scratch my satisfying itch. We talk about sometimes clearing something is very satisfying. This was just very tedious.
Yeah, I felt like that was definitely like, it felt like, you just kill the enemies as an aside to the real point of the game, which is like the more boring thing, just shooting these blocks. But I also felt usually, unless I just missed a bunch of things, I felt that usually you can tell like, okay, that one that's way over to the side in like a slightly different shade is clearly my objective. Whereas like the stuff that's under like the main little blocks was always like, if you explore, you might find a cool bonus or something.
Oh, absolutely. Like there's no, if it was just that the gray blocks were only for the power-ups or for the holes, then they might as well just not be there at all, right? It might as well just be, this is where the power-up is and you see it. But I get that. I just can't help feel like, we briefly talked about the length of the game, and the areas are pretty big. They only get bigger. The game only gets longer as it goes on. And I just wonder, like, Well,
the game gets longer. No, I just like the idea of that.
Right. No, you're right.
I know what you mean too, but it's funny.
The areas get bigger. The areas get bigger. So, like, usually...
The nightmare.
The nightmare grows. The idea of, like, so you take the first area, for instance, right? And that takes a good amount of time to finish, but that's the quickest area to finish. So it's only getting longer from there, and I just wonder if there was, like, a smoother gameplay loop, not to get through these things faster, but just to make exploration more exciting and less like, kill the enemies, shoot all the gray blocks, find out if you got anything good, on to the next tile.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of repetition in this game. I think that I'm not trying to get too final ideas here with it, but I do think that, like, the moment to moment gameplay is interesting enough to handle that kind of repetition. But yeah, this is definitely a game that needs its password system, because I can't play this kind of game for that long of a sitting because of, like, those reasons.
Yeah, definitely. If it didn't have, like, some way to save your progress, I think that would be a big mistake. It sounds like I'm threatening them, but I just mean it would be a bad call on their part.
Joe, I know you didn't beat the game, but it sounds like you got pretty far. In terms of length, were you starting to feel its length, or did you think, like, well, because there's a password system and everything, I don't mind, how long the game is because I'm enjoying the experience?
The latter, definitely. I mean, I'm still looking forward to going back to it. Like I said, I actually didn't realize how not far I was. I thought I had gotten decently far, but I was still, like, I'm like halfway through the game, if that, based on these YouTube videos. But I'm excited to keep going back to it, but only because I'm able to take breaks and pick it back up, But it feels like something that you want to put a lot of time into, and it doesn't. Maybe later in the game, I mean, I can see it possibly starting to get, like, repetitive and more boring. But, like, right now, I'm just, like, I'm still excited to see, like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next ability I unlock? And what's the next shmup level going to look like? And what's the next boss going to look like? And yeah, even though the environments get a little samey, so far that hasn't hurt me too much.
Yeah, I will say that while the environmental design leaves a little bit to be desired, I think the enemy and boss designs make up for it pretty good. Like, these bosses are, in some cases, very badass, and in some cases just, like, really creative looking. So I give them props on that.
Yeah, the bosses are very intimidating too. Like, even though they can't really do too much in terms of, like, what their designs might make you think they can do, the designs alone are really something to to strike fear into the player of, like, I got to take down that. Like, we don't usually have that in NES games.
No.
Yeah.
I think, it's like when you see Bowser, right? You're like, all right, I just got to, like, run under this guy when he jumps. Like, it's, and, it could be tough sometimes. Like, you don't always get it right. But it's different when you see the size of some of these bosses and the palette too. Like, the designs and the pixel art of them is really beautiful. So, not that it had, like, the best boss fights ever or anything, but they were standouts. Yeah,
and it was like there was consistency. Like, there wasn't just like, oh, there's a couple that are really cool, but the rest are kind of dog shit. Like, no, they all feel like they still have some value to them. And even some of the, like, just random mobs have some really cool designs to them. Like, in the first area, that you'll see these spider sort of things. There'll only be, like, one spider, and then if you just let it live long enough, it's going to turn to 8 spiders. And if you let that live long enough, like that group live, it'll turn to, like, 18. And then you gotta, like, leave because you're crying because there's too many spiders, and I think that hit too close to home. But just stuff like that, where different mobs have different ways that they act too. There's enough games that we've played where mobs are mobs, and maybe one takes more hits than the other, but they act exactly the same. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, definitely refreshing to see like the level of thought put to like enemy placement and design and stuff.
Yeah.
So let's get into now when your when your robot girl turns into her ship form and you're in the corridors. That this is the shmup part of the game. I don't want to like start off just saying negative things about it, but the first thing I noticed, and this is why I'm bringing it up first, is that it felt like everything was happening like so fast. Like maybe the screen real estate was like a little more limited because of the size of the sprites, or maybe it's because they didn't like hide the amount of projectiles you can shoot and the amount of projectiles enemies can shoot. Like this feels like way more than we're used to in our NES shmups. It actually did at times feel like a bullet hell, an early one at least. So I just felt like everything was happening so fast at a pace that even for, like top-notch games like Gradius and Life Force, like we did not feel this level of urgency in some parts of the ship form. Like I don't want to make it seem like the whole shmup is just like you always got to be perfect or something like that.
No.
But even how the game starts off, like how the game starts off, it's all happening to you very quickly. And it's almost like a relief to like get the break and go into the humanoid form after you take care of the corridor.
I agree that they're definitely very high energy, very difficult, very dense. I think that there's a few things that sort of contribute to this. One is just sort of like there isn't as much screen real estate because you've got this entire heads-up display below, and I feel like most shmups don't really have that much of the screen taken up by numbers. And I think the others are sort of like it's on purpose. Like there's more going on because you have a health bar and you don't need to be perfect, or like you can take more than one or two like 2 or 3 hits if you have like a shield in some of the other shmups that we've been playing. So you can tank some hits, and the game is like is more difficult because of that. But I think it would have been kind of silly to sort of scale that difficulty to a game that lets you take like 20 hits at a time. I think that would be kind of boring.
No, you're absolutely right, Sean. The fact that there is a life meter and that it's replenishing too, like
they're very generous with that too.
Yes, if that wasn't the case in a bullet hell, we'd be screwed here.
Absolutely, yeah. I also will say that I think that, especially in the first level, I had the same feeling, like, wow, why is this so rapid pace? But some of that I think was a little bit of an illusion for me, just because the background moves so fast. But the enemies that come at you, I feel like if you were to isolate them from the background, it's not that much crazier than another shmup.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that
they're moving
too.
faster, but they're like, there's fewer of them. So I thought that like the beginning of the first level was decently balanced as far as challenge, but I will say that once I got towards the end of that first level, like just before the boss battle and the boss battle itself, where there are these things opening up from the ground and they're all shooting at you, that took me forever. Like if I didn't have to play this for the podcast, I would have been done with the game there. I'm like, I'm not into this. This is too hard of a shmup. But like I didn't even know that there was more to the game. I just thought it was all going to be shmup. So like when I finally beat that part, I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised at like how much more game there was. But like that part almost stopped me completely.
Yeah, there's got to be a reason why they made that so challenging. Like I'm not saying it was the hardest thing in the whole game or anything, obviously not. But like if that's the first thing you do as a player, right? It would be like if in Legend of Zelda, before you get the sword, you have to take on a bunch of enemies without any weapon, right? It's like, you don't start a game like that. Like, you don't make it the hardest thing possible. So I thought it was a little strange, and I agree, Joe, it did take several tries to get through it because of, just how many things are firing at you. But then it's even more odd when you get to the, the next corridor, and it's the I think that's like the underwater one with the fish and stuff like that. Is that ringing a bell?
Yeah, the fish.
Yeah, yep, that's the second
Yeah.
one. Yep.
But no, and like, you know, that actually starts off pretty slow. Like, these fish come down, try to take care of them before they hit the bottom of the screen, because then they'll start swimming back at you. You have time to make your decisions. Eventually, you don't have time anymore. But, like, it kind of eased you into things more. Whereas I don't feel like I didn't feel eased into the game. And maybe that's a story thing. Like, they're just trying to, like, start on a really intense note so that you feel the urgency of your mission and everything like that. But it did feel off.
Yeah. I think that, like, I appreciate what they were trying to do with it. I do think, especially if your whole game is this balancing between the shmup levels and these top down levels, you probably want to get your player there, even if you have it like a frantic opening where it's crazy and stuff like that. You probably don't want that first boss to be so tough that, like, some people might not even get to the next part before they write this off as a shmup. Not that, like, everybody else hates shmups other than me, but yeah, you might want to, like, I feel like you might want to get that point across a little earlier so people kind of know what they're getting into. And I will also say, I do think that, I mean, I faced maybe 4 or 5, I think 5 of those shmup bosses, maybe 4 of them, I can't remember. But I think that first boss in the shmup thing was the hardest boss I fought so far. I mean, some of them definitely got pretty challenging, but that first one is just like, there's like nowhere to hide.
Oh, is this this is the one with the eyes that keep opening and got blown up?
Yeah. And there's literally
very
there's like 17 of them. Like, it's not like, oh, you gotta hit these 4 spots.
It does get easier as you fight the fight, because there's less things firing at you, but it's that reverse difficulty curve there.
Right.
I found that for those eye things, it did help. And this is just in general for this game with the amount of bullets and everything. It helped to kind of like be at the bottom center, and then when projectiles start to overwhelm you, kind of like hug a corner and make like a circle, so this way you go around all the projectiles so that they kind of go off into that corner that you were hanging out in, and you come back to your bottom center again. I use that trick a lot, and it seemed to work well. It doesn't work well all the time, and there are certain times where, you just have to understand that you're going to lose a little bit of life because you need to take down some of these enemies so that you're not constantly being hit by bullets.
Yeah.
Right.
We kind of talked about the power-ups being, like having 2 uses, both in the humanoid form and then the ship form. But I feel like it's worth talking about the power-ups again now that you're in shmup form, and just how much that helps these levels. Because I feel like, not even just for the boss fights or whatever, but for when there's a lot of enemies going on screen. In particular, there's that one sub-weapon you have where it's just like a big ball. Maybe it's a ball of fire or something that goes around you in a circle. That was like a pretty pivotal sub-weapon for me, because it was acting as like a sponge for most of the bullets.
Yeah, no, that provided my little security blanket a lot of the time. I did end up using the one that you can kind of shoot out. I don't know if that was a different weapon or like an upgraded version of that weapon, because it's the same projectile, but instead of it always circling you just sort of like send that out.
It spirals, right?
Yeah,
like,
sort of spirals away from you. But no, I like those just because I find in like in a shmup that area of effect stuff is sort of what gets me going. So.
Yeah, that was really helpful. The other one that I used a lot actually was actually just the first. Well, I don't know. I think it's the first one you're intended to get. I guess you don't have to necessarily, but it's just like a larger like ball that you fire forward. That's what it is on first, the.
Yeah.
Okay, I just know it's the first one in the like slots. But that's what it is on the overworld. It fires in front of you, just like a more powerful regular blaster. But on the in the shmup levels, your main blaster only fires forward, like in a regular shmup. But depending on which direction you're going, this weapon that I'm talking about will fire in that direction. So it was really helpful on some of the bosses that like shoot out some like smaller enemies at you, and they're coming at from the sides. So I would just be hitting A and B at the same time, always shooting forward at the boss and like switching left to right to kill anything that's coming at me from the left or right. And like I'm not even sure that's how they intended it, but it just gives you that level of options of like ways to use these things.
That sounds like it was designed to do that, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess I wasn't sure if it was designed to like be, because then even when I was not shooting things on the side, I would just continue hitting both of them and firing them both forward, so I was just like double damaging the enemy. I mean, it probably was also designed to do that, but just gives you a lot of different ways to think about how to use your weapons.
If you manage to beat the game, which Sean, we'll check in on you. Were you able to?
No.
Okay. No, me neither. No worries. So none of us managed to do it. However, if you do beat the game, you you get the ending and everything like that, and then they give you a password, just the letters TGL, which I think is really funny because the passwords are actually like pretty darn long in the regular game. So the fact that you could have just known this like three
Guardian
letters,
Legend, yeah.
yeah, and like had you have just put that password in. If you put that password in on the main screen, you don't have to, like, it doesn't have to detect that you've beaten the game or not. You unlock a corridor rush mode, essentially, like just a version of the game with just the shmup parts of it.
I like that. That's cool.
And what's interesting is that the obvious thing there is like, wait a minute, the power-ups, like, I won't ever be able to collect any of them.
Do you get all of them?
Right. No, you get them based on your score in each level. So, like, depending on your score and, as you defeat each corridor, you unlock certain power-ups. So you want to score a ton of points to get the best stuff, so that you can then use those in later levels. And it's just a really smart
That's a cool
idea.
Easter egg, yeah.
Yeah, of like a whole different way to play the game, again, without having to do all of the area exploration.
And not experiencing 70% of the game.
Yeah. But yeah, that is a really good like indicator of how much care they put into this game, because they could have also like, just given you all the power-ups at the beginning or just made them like pickups, but they designed a different way of doing it, like
just for this special mode.
Yeah, just for this like extra mode. And I think that kind of like attention to detail is apparent like throughout the game.
Yeah, they're 100% I think on the ball here in terms of understanding a lot about game design that just a lot of other developers just don't do when we complain about their games. I think even though we had things to complain about here in the Guardian Legend, we could appreciate a lot of the thought that went into the game itself, and it's surprising to see stuff like that in 1989, regardless of who's making it. Joe, you mentioned that you did not know about the other, the Zelda-like component of the game until you beat the shmup thing. I would argue that, like, they definitely didn't intend for that, because they sold the game based on, like, they had commercials that were like, if you like Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, you'll love the Guardian Legend, which just sounds bizarre. That they would have a commercial saying, you love these other games that we didn't make, so buy our game. But, like, they sold it like that, but the back of the box has it too, and the manual has it, so I gotta imagine, like, at the very least, like, the idea was in people's heads, but I kind of wish it wasn't. I kind of wish, like, in a reverse marketing strategy, they only sold it as a shmup, or we only told people it was a shmup, Like, I feel like nobody gets to experience the Guardian Legend like how you did, where all of a sudden it's like, whoa, there's a whole nother game.
It's a mind blow, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like the tricky like line to walk. I always think about that with movies and games stuff. If there's like a really cool like twist that is revealed like early in the movie, like it's really cool to have your audience experience that, but also it's like, well, you want to sell it too, though. You want people to want to go see the movie, or you want people to want to play the game. So like maybe if they didn't advertise for it, a lot more people like me wouldn't have picked it up.
And now we have trailers that just tell the entire spark notes of the plot. So here's where we are 30 years later.
Yeah.
We need trailers with title cards that just say, you won't believe the twist, but not reveal it. They just say that. Anyway, on to development here.
Whoa, before we get into like development history,
sure.
Have you guys seen like the box art for this game?
I have.
Okay, it's kind of bland, right? Just like somebody's brow looking over a desolate wasteland.
Yes.
Then there's like two others. There's
the Japanese one.
So there's the European one, which is like it's the cool like space girl, and she's looking at the planet. It's definitely more interesting than the American version because at least like your character's on it, and we get to kind of see what that sprite looks like all painted out. But yeah, the Japanese one is some like Lovecraftian, like H.R. Geiger inspired like nightmare of a space girl. Where
okay, but Sean, isn't that Genova?
Okay.
It's basically
I was trying to figure out
Genova.
what that reminded me of. Yeah, that's Genova. You're right.
Except she's still got her head. Oh, it's just so weird. Like I wouldn't have expected that. Like how colorful this game is. Like to see this very like forlorn, like sad, like messed up nightmare of a woman.
Like cords coming out of her head and everything, and
she doesn't look like she's happy to be there. But I just thought that was really that was really interesting.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that was in my show notes.
Okay.
I have an extra thought too before we move on.
Please.
This is like a little bit of a weird aside, but I just appreciate that in this game. I think this is the manual where it says how to play. I think it's the most concise but most descriptive and like explanatory like couple of paragraphs on how to play that we've seen. It's literally just 3 small short little paragraphs, and it just like after reading I'm like, oh, okay, I know exactly what I have to do for the whole game. Like I obviously didn't read it before I started playing, or else I would know what the game was all about. But it's just like I think that a lot of our manual writers could take a leaf out of this book and like simplify things and make sure you understand exactly what's going to happen here.
It is a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of like the really cringy manuals that we've been reading that just assume that you don't know how to hold a controller. And it's been 5 years now, or 5. Yeah. So I think we could figure it out.
Yeah, and they also get into like greater detail and stuff later, and they get into the lore stuff. But it's just like there's just that one section, how to play, and it just tells you everything you need to know in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
There's also a beautiful picture of the planet in the manual that like explains like it. It has like it carves into it a little bit to show you like the interior and stuff, and it explains like
the cutout. The dungeon,
like
the labyrinth.
The dungeon, the labyrinth, but also it shows like the exhaust where like how it's able to travel at rapid speed towards Earth. Like you can see it's like a little rocket ship as well.
Star Killer base vibes.
It also kind of looks like one of those things you'd have in like your like Earth science book that teaches you about like the layers of the Earth.
Here's
and like
the mantle and the inner
the
inner core and the outer core.
Yeah. But the picture to the left of that on page 3, it's got like the lore on it, and it's got this like it's just like a beautiful haunting artwork, of what this planet must look like on its surface. I don't know, I like it. I like the aesthetic that it all sets up.
It's very aesthetic.
So to move on to development, we mentioned this was made by Compile, the legendary shmup developers. They made Zanuck on the NES, which we've just talked about today. And they also, last time I think when we talked about Zanuck, we talked about Puyo Puyo, which none of you guys care about, but that's another thing that Compile made. And, they're still making Puyo Puyo games. Mm-hmm. All right, never mind. Anyway, it was published by Broderbund. And we haven't seen those guys since 1987. Do you remember Broderbund?
Isn't that Raid of Bungling Bay?
That is Raid on Bungling Bay. That is Spelunker. That is Lode Runner. And unfortunately, Deadly Towers.
Oof. Big oof. Oh, yeah, you're right. I remember that name on there.
So there's just something about them as a publisher that, like, I feel like they really take a chance on developers, who make interesting games and stuff like that. Because I think, like, Lode Runner was an indie dev pretty much made by himself. And same thing with Raid on Bungling Bay was made by William Wright, who wound up making SimCity and all that. So like that's really cool that like they go for developers. And I think Compile is just like another one that they were like, yeah, like they're making great games over in Japan. Like, of course we want to bring this over to the States. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they've got like a little bit of like a boom or bust sort of like risk reward situation going on.
Oh, for sure.
Where it's like, yeah.
William Wright. It's funny. I hear the full name.
Yeah, did I get that right though? Like I was nervous about
it's Will.
Yeah,
It's Will
right.
Wright. It's just I've never heard him called William Wright.
Sir William Wright, if you
Sir
will.
William Wright.
And he will be right. The sequels and spin-off section here. Not much to say, but apparently this is a sequel to a 1986 MSX game known as Gardic. And I think you can tell, Sean, based on the Japanese box art, that the game is called The Legend of Gardic.
Yeah.
And so this was just Gardic was the first game. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on it, I'm pretty sure Gardic is just a shmup. It doesn't have the action-adventure element to it. So this was a pretty ambitious sequel of like, well, we made a great shmup. What if we also created a whole, like, other game inside of it? So I think that's a cool idea, and it's probably, if you liked the Guardian Legend a lot, it's probably worth it to try and, like, see what Gardic did that they thought, like, oh, we could improve this.
Yeah, I'm trying to find... It seems to be so wrapped up with the... okay, here's some stuff. Yeah, I'll have to check this out.
For sure. Now, there were no other sequels for this game, even though it itself is a sequel. There's nothing after that. Compile never touched the game again. But I have it on good authority that if you're looking for something as specific in genre as this, a game where you are in one element a shmup and then another element basically like a top-down game, top-down adventure game, then may I recommend Super Star Force for the Famicom. So it's another, it's like in the same thing. It never came over to the States, but Famicom is close enough. So if you're looking for like another game to scratch that itch, Super Star Force. You guys will remember we played Star Force.
Yeah.
So, we never got the Super version. And whenever I hear Super in front of a game, other than Super Mario Brothers, I always assume it's going to be a Super Famicom or Super NES game, right? Like you never think like, oh, that's on the NES, but it says Super.
Yeah, I have the same thing. Even after you said Famicom and then you said Super Star Force, I was like, oh yeah, Super Nintendo. And I was like, wait, no, that's not what you said.
And if you're looking for something a little more advanced, may I recommend Sigma Star Saga on the Game Boy Advance, which also is a very similar Guardian Legend inspired game.
Fun.
So maybe who knows? Maybe one day we'll play Super Star Force when we journey over to the Famicom side of things. And when we get to the Game Boy Advance games in 3040, we will play Sigma Star Saga.
I can't wait.
I know what you can't wait for really though, Sean. And that
don't assume
is whether or not the Guardian Legend will be on our essential games list, and we determine that on a little thing we like to call the essential games list. Sean, please.
Okay, I'll stop.
No, please give us your vote.
Okay. Guardian Legend. I was very pleasantly surprised by this game. Again, one of those that I'm surprised I had never heard of. I really like all of the cool mashup stuff they got. The number one thing for me was this huge arsenal that can be used in two different settings, whether it's the shmup or the action adventure. I think it's got a really cool and finally coherent sort of story, even though it's still a little silly. A lot of the issues that I have with it are easy to ignore because the core gameplay loop still holds up, and you don't need to play this game from beginning to end, and you're in fact discouraged from doing so because it is a very long game. But I have to say that this is so unique and so well executed, aside from some nitpicks, that I'm going to put this on the essential games list.
All right, that is one vote for it. Joe, if you vote yes, then it is on the essential games list. If you vote no, then it still has a chance, thanks to me. So I will actually go first, Joe. Okay?
Okay, so then what you said is not true.
Right.
Okay.
And it was a whole waste
Go.
of everybody's
Please
time.
go.
So Mike wants to be the guy.
Yeah,
that
that's fine.
says
He never
things.
gets to be.
No, he never gets to do it.
Okay, so I like how you say I want to be the guy, as if you think that you can predict how I'm about to vote.
I have a feeling.
Huh, interesting. All right. Well, here's the scoop on the Guardian Legend in terms of, like, you know, we play these games a little bit further out than the day that we record them, right? We're not playing them the morning of. We've been playing them for a while, so...
Oh, yeah, totally never done that.
When I played the Guardian Legend for the first time, I was really enamored by the uniqueness of the game. Like Sean said, you know, it's very interesting how there's nothing else like this, and so you gotta like consider that immediately. Like, wow, there hasn't been anything like this yet, and if there has, it hasn't been like this, you know. So like, even if something mixes genres, this is like really mixing genres to the point where you're basically getting two games in one at the end of the day. So I like that about it. But I can't help but feel like throughout the entire time that we've been having the podcast that the game doesn't really play as smoothly as we're describing. All the things that we praised deserve praise, and all the things that we nitpicked are totally things that I think a lot of people who have played the game would agree with those nitpicks. You know, there's something about, like, if this game didn't have a password system, or it really should have a battery, like it should have been able to save. If it didn't have that, I feel like this game would be dead on arrival, just because, not even just because of its length, but just because of what it's asking you to do and how much of it it's asking you to do and the repetitive nature of it. But the fact that you can, like, say, all right, I did this area today, I'll come back tomorrow, is nice and has a bit of a more modern feel to it than a lot of NES games we play, even if they have passwords. Like, something about the way this game breaks up the difference between area and corridors felt nice. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, as I continued to play the game, I kept flip-flopping. Do I want this to be on the essential games list or not? Are the nitpicks, like, enough? You know, it's kind of weird to discredit a game based on nitpicks, right? We should have some overall negative concern to take it off. And before we recorded the episode, I figured out what I was going to do. And so I'm going to do what my heart tells me. And I'm going to put it on the essential games list. Because at the end of the day, I feel like this got enough of the shmup aspect right and the action-adventure aspect. Like, if it's 90% a great game in both of those different genres, then this is absolutely a must-play for anybody. I'm not sold that, like, everyone is going to love this game, and I'm sure some people are turned off by either the length or the difficulty or the repetitiveness of it, but... You know, if you're going through the NES catalog and you skip this one, then you've actually missed something. You've actually missed a game that is worth playing. So for that reason, it's on the essential games list. And I'm sorry to steal the thunder, Joe, but you can still vote and still make a meaningful impact. So what will your vote be?
I'll give my worthless vote now. Is this what you feel like all the time? I feel bad now. I'm like, well, I got no power.
Yes, that is exactly what it is.
But anyway, I will say that when I was a kid, and I had just a few NES games, and I would think about all the giant library of NES games out there, and even just before we started this podcast, when I wanted to go to back to NES games, I was always looking for I can just pick up any random NES game, and there's a good chance it's going to be something I never heard of, but this crazy cool adventure that I could just get super absorbed into, like a book. You know, it's like I could pick up a good book, and there's a good chance I'll be very interested in that story. And since we started this podcast, it turns out that there's not a lot of games that nobody's ever heard of that are wow, this blows me away. But once in a while, there's an exception, and this really is one of those exceptions. This feels like what I always wanted, when you just pick a random game. Because when I went into this, I was just okay, another, we got a whole slew of games that nobody's ever heard of, kind of all close together. So it's gonna be a while before we play a good game again. And I think this is the second or third time in that slew that I've been proven wrong. And I will say that for me, my desire to put this on the essential games list has only grew the more I played this game. So like when it started, it was almost at 0, and then like as I started like getting power ups and learning new things, like I was just more and more hyped about this game, and I really, this is because then there was a period of time where I was like, oh, okay, this is good, but it's not as great as like some of the other games you have on there. But like I'd almost match it up with some things like Blaster Master and stuff. Maybe not quite that much, but like I think that this is a game you shouldn't miss. So I will definitely make it a unanimous vote and throw this on the essential games list.
All right, very exciting. 3 yays, and we'll be sure to get Sam's opinion the next time he's able to make it onto the show. However, I think the big takeaway that all three of us kind of said here is like, you'd be missing something if you didn't play this one. And I definitely felt like, if after having played it, if I, this sounds crazy, but if I missed this one, right? If as we continue this chronological exploration, it feels strange if eventually like we completed all the games and then you found out that you like, oh, there's still some good ones out there. Like, this is what it's all about. This is why we play them in order and everything like that, and give each of them a fair shot, because you never know when you're going to come across something like this. And I'm not going to pretend like, you guys who listen to the show and know all the NES games and grew up with them, that like the Guardian Legend is some hidden gem. You guys might think it's obvious, right? I think we're all three of us are talking about like, if you've never really been familiar with the NES, you hear about games like Super Mario Bros. 3 and Legend of Zelda and Kirby's Adventure. You don't hear about the Guardian Legend, let's be honest. And so I think it's time that like a lot more people got that spotlight on a game like this, and just also saw what else was out there. Like, hey, I think I'm actually going to go check out Super Star Force and Sigma Star Saga now, just because it's weird to think that there's this whole other type of game out there that I've never played before, and now there's 2 other ones I can check out. Any other thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of follow up with what you said and sort of address the audience and saying, like, it's cool that you guys are here now and that you guys have played these games before, but this podcast is really designed to be listened to 20 years from now for, like, the Gen Z crowd when they're, like, in their 40s or something, so that they can discover things, Like, we're really talking to them.
Yeah, I mean, the whole intention of the podcast is really actually to eventually make it available only offline in a time capsule with cassette tapes that we will bury and not allow anybody access to until 2300, when the Lions have taken over the world. And then this way the Lions can figure out what the good NES games are.
Like, what are the best NES games in the like from a mindset of like the mid 2020s, the early 2020s.
Yeah. And also, according to what you said before, Mike, that means that this time capsule will be opened back up hundreds of years before we start playing Game Boy Advance games.
That's true. That's true. We will actually, as an anniversary for when we start reviewing Game Boy Advance games, we will hold a 700th anniversary time capsule spectacular when we get to the Game Boy Advance games.
Yeah, it'll be great. It'll be us and the Lions.
Yeah, that's all they only spared the 3 of us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's totally what happened at the end of, Red 13's not a lion, right?
He's like a cat dog thing.
He's not a cat dog.
He's a cat dog. That's what they based the Nickelodeon hit show off of.
I'd say
Red 13.
I don't know. He's got feline and canine characteristics. I actually don't know.
Yeah, I'd give him some kind of you're right. He's like wolf. He's like a wolf tiger.
Yeah, a wiger.
Yeah, that's what they call them. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I just couldn't help but feel like, it'll be me, you, Joe, and Red 13 500 years from now.
What happened to Sam?
Oh,
well, he couldn't make it to the episode.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, there's going to be plenty more episodes of this show. Don't you worry. Next week, Legacy of the Wizard. A couple episodes back, I predicted that was going to be a game where we hear the story of the only wizard that ever exists, because it's the legacy of the wizard. Now, that was a bad joke, and most of my jokes are bad. So, Sean, tell us one funny joke before we go, and make it related to our Twitter.
Okay. What do you call a young professional that has stopped doing work and instead records his thoughts on old NES games on the internet.
I don't know what.
At Michael Esposito Film, at twitter.com/nostalgiacast.
Close enough. It's at NostalgiaCast is the Twitter. We post there all the time. People tweet at us, and we are very prompt to respond back. So it's amazing, guys, how quickly we can respond to you. So why don't you respond back faster?
We have been described as just being very on time, if nothing else.
Yes, promptness is what we're known for in every single review that we have. Every positive review of the podcast always mentions how prompt we are. Even the negative ones, they mention that we're prompt. I'm Michael Esposito. You can find me at Esposito Film on Twitter, and I'll talk to you soon.